Jonathon Webster, in conversation with Angie Titch, draws on varied experiences across the career framework to identify the contribution critical companionship, underpinned by reflection and listening into action, has made to transforming practice. Jonathon's journey spans expert practice, consultant practice, and also beyond as a regional strategic director. Critical companionship is described as walking alongside another and is different from mentorship and coaching. And also it strongly positions the workplace as the main resource for learning, developing and improving across all levels of the career framework.
A huge welcome to you to our conversation today. I'm Angie Titch. I'm a physiotherapist originally, but I've been working in health and social care and a number of academic organisations and other campaigning groups and citizens groups, bringing critical companionship to people. And critical companionship arose from my work with nurses at the John Radcliffe Hospital in the 90s, where the nurses were transforming their systems, their culture, their structures, their practices, to move from task-focused nursing to person-centred care. So I've been a critical companion for many, many years. And our session today is about looking at a critical companionship in the context of being and becoming a consultant practitioner. And Jonathon, you are the ultimate, if you like, in consultant practice experience, in that you have been doing this for a very long time. You're in the very first or the second wave, actually, of consultant nurses. So, Jonathon, over to you. Will you tell us your story of being and becoming a consultant practitioner?
Of course. Yeah, so thank you, Angie, and it's really good to be able to share my reflections and experiences of critical companionship with you. As Angie has alluded to, I was a second wave appointee consultant nurse for older people back in 2001. And that's a post I held for about 8 years. But I guess my story around critical companionship actually starts before then, before I became a consultant nurse for older people. And I guess in a way I can almost trace my journey back to when I was a student nurse, and then on qualifying and then having various sort of staff nurse posts up into a junior charge nurse, when I really started to realise and be able to start sort of articulating my curiosity in reflection and thinking about practice. And this was really at a time before we were talking about reflective practice. And looking back into my journey up until that time, I probably sense a professional restlessness around wanting to sort of be able to explore practice further, and to really start understanding what I would articulate as being reflection now, around how we learnt from and in practice through the human interaction of care and through working with each other. Before I became a consultant nurse, I completed my master's in nursing, and I was really fortunate at that time. I had the late Professor Melanie Jasper and also Gary Rolfe, who were course directors for my master's programme, and they really introduced me to a lot of the theories and frameworks around reflective practice, the models that we're all really familiar with, you know, the work of Chris Johns, the work of Brian Gibbs, and others, and clearly sort of Melanie and Gary's work as well. And what I was really able to do was to apply that theoretical learning and understanding to the work context, to the practice context. So at that time, I was a charge nurse working within acute medicine for older people. And to really sort of apply that learning to the work context, the practice context, the interface context in which, you know, care is delivered and experienced, and to really sort of start embedding reflection, not only in my own practice, but within the practice of the team that I was working with and as part of at that time. And again, at that time, we weren't using the language of person-centeredness, but actually I look back and can see that what we were really focused on as a team was about really developing and progressing person-centered care, and how facilitation and critical reflection was increasingly becoming part of how we worked as a team. At the time, I probably wouldn't have articulated in that way, because I would have probably said it was absolutely about keeping the person central to care. But actually, I think back to how we were working as a team, how we were growing collectively as a team, and those key characteristics of critical inquiry into practice, reflecting in and on action, focusing care from a very strong person-centered place, and also, you know, sort of developing collective leadership as well, and shared governance. Again, we weren't using that language at the time, but I can absolutely see what we were doing through, you know, sort of a model of reflection, and increasingly what I would articulate today as being sort of critical companionship.
Yes, and that really is a beautiful example of what we're trying to do on this program, is to help people to start from where they're at, to start from where they practice, from what they already know, and how we all develop kind of theories about things from practice, about how to do things. And I think you've articulated that, how you did it in your the early practice and with the teams that you're working with, and then starting to weave in and to blend with the theories, people like Melanie Jasper and Gary Rolfe and Donald Shern, actually, with the reflection in and on action, weaved into our current practice and our increasing understanding and our practical know-how. And that is absolutely key to critical companionship, because it's about starting where people are at. And people will always have those theories that they have created from their own practice and that they use in their practice, but they often don't articulate it either to themselves or to others. Sorry, Jonathan, go on.
No, and I was going to say, and I think it's really important to acknowledge, Angie, that it isn't always an easy journey.
Yeah.
It isn't always easy, because not everyone will always be brought in to developing new ways of working. And I think it's just really important to recognize that as well, because sometimes people's own values and beliefs might be at odds with what it is we want to achieve. And I think it's about how, through critical companionship, we can work through that.
Yes.
And work with that, because that's the real world context.
Yes.
In which we practice.
Yes. And that, again, that the thing about critical companionship, it is about it's about relationship, and it's about what are called graceful care. It's about kindness, and it's about understanding that things aren't always easy. It isn't easy to transform ourselves, let alone transform, systems and transformation and cultures and practices. That it is hard, and it's about what you might call, and I challenge, high support.
Yes, yeah.
Again, go on.
And I think it's about recognizing that people respond in different ways, and it's about how we work with that. But fundamental to this is also about how we create those effective workplace cultures.
Yes.
In which reflection, learning, innovation, transformation, development can really grow and thrive. And with a lot of the work that I'm doing now in my role at UEA, I have a real clear focus around what we need, how we need to practice, and the key cornerstones around creating those effective workplace cultures that really enable us to grow and thrive and flourish through sort of critical companionship is really important.
Yes.
And key to that is the value we place on learning in practice and from practice, and how we use that learning to really inform what we do next.
Yes, exactly. And I know from your stories is that you use critical companionship processes and the ideas from critical companionship in a variety of different kinds of facilitation.
Yeah. So when I stepped into my first consultant nurse post back in 2001, so I was a second wave appointee. So the first wave appointees come into post about sort of 6 months beforehand. So these were all brand new roles sort of nationally, and there had been a lot of publicity about, sort of what these roles would be. But actually, there's one thing actually talking about what the roles are, but actually something quite different about how we translate consultant level roles into the practice and organisational context. So as a consultant nurse for older people, I was the second consultant nurse in the trust, but I was the first consultant nurse for older people in the region. And so in a way I was charting out the journey around what being a consultant nurse for older people really looked like.
Yes.
And I think critical companionship at that stage in time, at every stage in time, has been really important to me, but at that stage in time was also really critical to really sort of help shape my understanding of what consultant level practice actually looked like. That differed from being an advanced practitioner role. Being a consultant nurse was a lot broader, but really thinking about how I took people on the journey with me. And again, what really struck me at that time is some people had really quite fixed ideas around what I would be doing as a consultant nurse for older people. I was very fortunate. My line manager was the director of nursing in the trust, who said to me, "This is a new role. I want you to spend the first 6 months really scoping out what the priorities are for the consultant nurse for older people across our whole organisation." And that was really sort of key for me in giving me that permission, but actually also having that support to work trust-wide and to really sort of start shaping what this role would look like, which was at times quite different to how others perceived the consultant nurse role as being. And that in itself provided huge opportunities, but also challenges along the way. And critical companionship, again, sort of helped me make sense of what I was experiencing through multiple different sort of stimuli, and thinking through how I would actually work with those enablers, but also those inhibitors as well, which is reflective of complexities of organisations.
Yes. And the complexity, as it turns out, of the consultant practitioner role. With those domains of leadership, expert practice, learning, developing, improving, research and evaluation, and consultancy. I mean, it is, as you say, it's very broad, and also the context is very broad.
I think it is, and I think at times it would be all too easy to slip into what one feels comfortable with. And I was really clear as a consultant nurse, sort of when I actually started unpicking really what does expert practice really look like, and 50% of my time as a consultant nurse was given over to expert practice, really starting to shape and define that based on the needs of older people accessing the organisation, based on the needs of the organisation as well, because We don't function in a silo. We're part of an organizational context that has many different drivers and imperatives. So for me, it was absolutely key to work with those, but actually to work across and as part of a system as well.
Yes.
And that's really fundamental, because the strategic leadership role of being a consultant nurse or consultant practitioner means that one steps out of one's own organisation and works with and alongside a whole host of different stakeholders from outside your employing organisation, and the importance around developing relationships with those people to really influence the strategic agenda.
Yes.
Because being a consultant nurse absolutely is about having huge amounts of knowledge. I don't know if I would use the word expert, because there's always learning, but actually being the expert in your field of practice, but actually developing that strategic leadership, which would take one outside of the organisation as well, which was really important. The acute hospital element will be one small part of a larger pathway, and therefore I was focusing very much on supporting that pathway and that pathway across a whole system, and that is important to the role.
Yes, I'm getting this vision of systems, sort of revolving entities, sort of all interlocking with each other, instead of perhaps working in silos as they might have done.
And at times I would sit back and reflect on the role and feel that it felt a little bit surreal, that in the morning I could be working clinically alongside another member of staff, providing care and working with someone, and then in the afternoon I could be at the Department of Health, involved in strategic discussions around, at the time we were implementing the National Service Framework for older people, so involved in those sort of national discussions about implementation of that. So one's world of being a consultant nurse, for me, took me across that whole spectrum of the clinical interface of care, and actually national strategic planning, which I think was a really exciting place to be, and to be able to work across that pathway. But at the same time, it called for quite a different skill set depending on the context in which I was working.
Yes, I mean, you sound to me like an embodiment of integrated care systems. Because you've got one foot here, and you're dancing them. You're blending and melding. I mean, a consultant practitioner is an enormous asset to an organisation, I can see.
Absolutely, but it's interesting because, having been in the role, organisations would come and people would come and talk to me about the role, because they were thinking about developing a consultant nurse. That's what we talked about at the time, but now it would be consultant nurse or consultant practitioner. And one of the things I would always say to people is, are you sure it's actually a consultant post that you want? Or is it an advanced practitioner post that you want? Because by definition, the consultant post, there is an expectation that you will work across systems. Whereas actually, if you're wanting someone who will solely deliver a clinic, is the consultant post the right post? Perhaps yes, but perhaps no. But how do you fulfill those other key domains around, sort of embedded research and inclusive evaluation? How do you strategically lead, and what vision do you have for the consultant to actually be able to strategically lead programs of work?
So it's becoming clearer and clearer as you tell us your story, how, as a consultant practitioner, an aspiring consulting practitioner, someone learning to be one, how important it is to have someone who you can walk alongside.
Absolutely.
A companion, or someone who is a person-centered facilitator, who is able to start from where you're at and help you to go where you want to go, where you need to go. And this, well, I don't know if you want to say anything, but I want you to tell the story when you were working. You were you were the regional chief nurse in, was it Northwest London?
So subsequent posts since being a consultant nurse roles post. So I held 2 consultant nurse posts across 2 different organisations. I then, after 8 years, stepped into a commissioning role and became Director of Quality and Nursing across 5 clinical commissioning groups. So in that role, I was a board member, and I was the nurse board member of the governing bodies. And how I use critical companionship changed because of the context I was working within, but actually I used many of the skills and expertise that I had developed previously to help support me in my role, but actually the team that I was leading as well, because I think one develops those skills and embodies those skills that become part of this is how I work.
Yes.
And I use those skills around critical companionship, around facilitation, around reflection, around learning, to inform practice, absolutely in that post. And then subsequently, when I was the interim regional chief nurse for one of the regions in England, how I used, again, those skills that I had developed through critical companionship, so walking alongside people. So an example, Angie, being you were my critical companion for a while, and how I used, in a mutual way of shared learning, my learning from that relationship that we had through critical companionship to really sort of inform my own development, which is different to mentorship, which is different to coaching.
Yes.
Because the relationship is very much about walking alongside.
Yes. Yes, about co-learning and co-inquiry.
It is.
And I used to come and meet you at the CCCG meeting in Regent's, but a Crescent.
An hour to have a critical walk through Regent's Park.
We did.
And that again was really important because it draws on the different senses as well. And in busy worlds, in busy lives, sometimes it's hard to stop and just listen and think and reflect. And thinking and reflection are different things. But to actually find that space through a critical companion relationship, to be able to do that.
Yes.
In a world that is, 100 miles an hour at times with no steps.
And yes, I do think, you have a picture of the Cotswolds behind you, which is where we've done other walks together. How important it is for working with the whole of ourselves. We can access those other parts of ourselves more easily in nature. And I've been doing this with hundreds of people, in different parts of the world, and it just makes such a difference if critical companions go together and sit in or walk around the hospital grounds or sit in the hospital garden or in the local park. And walk, often starting to walk in silence as well. You talked about really, really listening. So opening up all the senses and really listening to the world around, as well as listening to our bodies and to our emotions, and then gently opening up conversation when both are ready. And critical companionship is different from those other facilitation roles in that it's a learning, it's co-inquiry, because your critical companion is also learning and inquiring, and you're learning together. So it's collaborative learning and inquiry. Your inquiry questions may be different, and the learnings may be different, but you're helping each other to learn, and that's the companionship of it.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between hearing and listening. So if I think about the listening skills of critical companionship, for me, listening is about action as well. It's a bit like reflection. You know, sort of, we can think, but there might not be any action linked to thinking. We can hear, but there might not be any action to hearing. But actually, through reflection is linked to action. And I would say through listening, if we so choose, we can link that to action as well. And that action can touch many of the interfaces of, you know, professional relationships that we have, whether it's with colleagues or as part of care delivery as well. But when I'm providing or working with someone as part of care, what am I listening to when someone's talking to me? Am I really listening to what it is they're saying, or am I just hearing what the person is saying to me?
Yes. When you're talking of that, it reminds me of when I was working with Kim Manley on the Consultant Nurse Project. We were doing an emancipatory action research co-inquiry, co-research with consultant nurses and aspiring consultant nurses as well. And there was one consultant nurse, she was amazing, and she managed during the project to get herself on the executive board of the trust, of the NHS trust. And she went along to the executive meetings, and all she did when she got there was tell stories. She told stories about patients and families and what was actually happening in the healthcare practices of the organisation that they were the executives of. And they were absolutely fascinated, and they really listened, and they used the stories to transform their policies. And you know, it really made a difference, as simple as that, because she was able to tell them stories that they hadn't heard before.
Yeah, and I think I think what's really key is how we use that narrative, how we use those stories linked to change, linked to action, and what this really means. I did a lot of work when I was in my PhD research, which I carried out when I was in my consultant nurse post, was around person-centered assessment with older people. And as part of that was the use of biographical assessment, and how we use narrative and story and biography to really develop and underpin care based on someone's life story. And that moves us away from a space of something that is, well, that's just really fascinating and interesting, but I'll get on with what I always do, to actually embedding how we use stories to really transform practice, and the way that we deliver care feels really important. And that is part of expertise, I would argue, about being able to do that. An expert practice. And I guess being able to link that to what that means from a political perspective. And I use the word politics or political, not with a capital P, but the small p within how we influence perhaps a wider, or, you know, organizational agenda using that expertise.
Shown you how the critical companionship and the consultant practitioner roles meld and blend different domains of practice, and it's complex, and learning how to meld and blend, how to dance those different domains. I hope that we've been able to show that, giving an introduction to it, and I do hope also that people you have a sense of the consultant practice is multi-professional. Though we've drawn on our healthcare experiences in this conversation, there are many other voices coming from other professions.
And I think it's really important to say, Angie, how valuable different voices are. So important, because that's how we grow, and that's how fundamentally we improve care and experience and outcomes for people, which is just fundamental, I'd say.